Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 1, in the middle of Chapter 150. So he's explaining in Avodas Hashem that which we discussed about the two types of Ilah v'Olol, which really is the difference between how Atzilus functions within its own world and for its own purpose, and how Atzilus relates to something outside of its own world. So basically, in simple terms, you can talk about it in terms of how something is connected to a pure, holy, sacred place as it works internally, and how something relates to something outside of that domain. Something like what we would say, how Kodesh, something deals with something in the world of Kedusha, let's say on Shabbos, or how Shabbos speaks to and communicates with and impacts the weekday. So everything in life has these two dimensions, has that Atzilus within it, and there's how Atzilus affects the Biyah, Bri Yitzir Asiyah. So though we're none of us on the level of Atzilus in its purest form, but as an example, we all have these two stages. The Atzilus within us is on Shabbos, let's say, and the weekdays. But Shabbos has to also impact, Kedusha has to also impact the Chel. Every day, when we're learning or we're davening, we're more in the world of Atzilus. When we go out to work and deal with the mundane matters of the day, we're now in Biyah. So there's how Atzilus affects Atzilus, how Atzilus affects Biyah. Now in Atzilus itself, what are these two dimensions? The difference between Meichin connecting to Midas and Meichin as they are on their own. So as we spoke, Midas is already application. Midas always needs a Zulas, another. So it's already relating to something outside of you. This is already, even in Atzilus itself, like we spoke, in the Medaber, there's Daimim Tzemei Chayim Medaber. And then there's Meichin. There's Meichin as it speaks to Midas and relates to that application. And then there's Meichin Be'etzem, how Meichin is to itself, which is connected to the idea itself, and just connecting to the concept, and not as it relates to something outside of itself. And those are the two types of Ilah v'Olol. One is that it's of the same personality, like a branch of a tree. That's how Atzilus speaks to itself. That's like the Kedusha in Shabbos, that's relating Shabbos to Shabbos. But then there's Shabbos of when we say, what we say is that Shabbos Menem is Baruch and Kula Yemin. That from Shabbos is a blessing for all 6 days of the week. That's how Shabbos speaks to the rest of the week, so it's influencing also the rest of the week and bringing a Kedusha, a certain sanctity and elevation. That's how Meichin speaks to me. That's already Ilah v'Olol of a different personality. So in Shabbos, when you think of Shabbos preparing and setting the tone for the rest of the week, you're already talking how Meichin is preparing for Midas, which, as we said, this is an Ilah v'Olol, which Midas and Meichin are not the same personality. Meichin and Midas, as he said, are subjective. Hagashas atzmei, you feel yourself. The second thing is it gets excited, it's spilus. And Meichin, it's not about you. Meichin is bittul, it's putting yourself aside. And doesn't have spilus, the same excitement and emotional reaction. So in Aveda too, these are the two types of Aveda. That's what he's leading to. So we discussed in the beginning, the first half of chapter 150, in the previous class, that in his bonus alaki, there's his bonus that's meant to bring Ava v'Yira. So it's Meichin that's meant to bring Midas. I discussed at length what his bonus means, what his Seirus Ava v'Yira means. So just to sum up, just to be able to continue the flow here, briefly, his bonus is a contemplation where a person sits and deliberately is focusing on contemplating about God, not about himself. That in turn, that contemplation in turn, brings feelings, awakens feelings, Ava v'Yira, and he said, and that is critical. Why? He says because through Ava v'Yira, Bizgalus Belev, that's how you refine and purify the chaymer, the crassness of an animal soul, and the repair of all things, because it's, and I discussed this also, what that means. And on the other hand, on the positive side, it also, well, both, and it also makes sure mitzvahs are done to their fullest. It enhances the performance of mitzvahs. Then he explained what is his bonus. His bonus was two stages. There's his bonus klali, his bonus prati. His bonus klali is be'inyan isavis yeshmayim. to contemplate how existence is not self-made. We're not self-made entities. We're not self-contained. Existence is yesh ma'ayin, and this itself is a logical conclusion that the yesh itself dictates. That when you observe and study a yesh, which means a defined and delimited existence like ours here, it compels us to say that there must be something that put it here. Because, as he said, yesh mi yesh cannot go back infinitely, because a yesh is finite. How could it go back infinitely? Second reason he said was because it's made up of murkav. It's a hybrid. So it's made up of parts. It's dependent on other things. It also cannot therefore be there on its own. And that leads us to Hezbonus Prati, to a more specific contemplation, where we think not just that the yesh dictates there's an ayin, that there's a force, that the yesh dictates, the existence dictates that there's a force that puts existence into play, but also that this force, in understanding the quality of this ayin. So his bonus is not just that it exists, mysterious force, but you can also contemplate on the quality and personality of this power. So even though it's distant power because it's concealed from us, which is obvious because the yesh wouldn't be a yesh if it was not some type of leap from that force to existence. Because if it was just a regular source, let's say like a source of water, so you can trace the steps. The fact is the yesh cannot find the ayin so easily. Nevertheless, he says there's still some type of relationship, because the yesh, takchutsu is an expression used sometimes, it applies itself to create the yesh. The ayin rather applies itself to create the yesh. It's not just out of the blue, suddenly pop. Like we say, Basarim Amoris Nivra Elam. God uttered 10 utterances. He didn't just say existence come into being. He said Yehi Er, Yehi Rakia. So right there you see that even godliness, divine energy, is applying itself with words, with expressions that are one different than the next, and applying itself to create. So we see an application, we see a relationship. God had just said Bereshis, but Bereshis, that would be it. But Ma'amer Echad, also Yachali Baris. But then you would not have a relationship. Then again, you would have a type of power. Of course, he can do anything he wants to do. But by applying himself, and specifically, and it goes in Shari Chadamunah, says that Sarah Mamoras break down into more details. Every letter has its serufim and its mechilufim and matrios and so on. All its permutations and configurations, etc. So every letter applies itself to the particular, like it says, every object in existence. The name, that is its Hebrew name, is what gives its life. So clearly you see the name is not just an amorphous same energy. The name of Evan, of a stone, is not the name of a eitz, a tree. And Adam is not the same name as a chaya. So you have everything has its own particular power. So that's an application. So even though on one hand the ayin is hidden, concealed from the yesh, like he says, b'derech lichuk, it's an expression here. Derech einarech b'chidus lichuk. That's why it's a yesh. Nevertheless, you have to say there's some relationship. Unlike Atzmus, unlike the real source of it all, the root of it all is Atzmus, because only he can create. From Atzmus, there's no relationship. Atzmus' power to create is we cannot relate to. That's not Yehi Er. That's already specific. That's the power b'chlal in general, creating something, a new entity like our type of entity that's not similar to godliness. That's actually a yesh. That's completely einarech, as he says. There's no relationship there. But once there's a relation, once there's a desire, as he said, and the kiruv, there's already a connection. He wants something. Once God says, I want something, he wanted to want, in other words, that creates a relationship. Before that, there's not even a desire. You can't even say the word desire. You can't even say rotz. And since there's a kiruv, I'm reading from the middle where we left off. I mean, we read this, but I'm just going to continue. And because it has to be an ayin b'kiruv elayesh, relatively speaking, there has to be some relationship between ayin and yesh. He must say, compels us to say that there's some progressive order here. How this ayin travels, how it progresses, how it transmits level to level to level, until it becomes a makar liyesh, till it becomes an actual source for the yesh. So you could say chesed of atzilus, chesed of bria, Chesed of Yitzirah, Chesed of Asiyah, that becomes water. So there's a progression that you can go all the way, trace all the steps. Remember, there was a very critical chapter we learned that reminds me now. We spoke about the power of a mushal. How if you want to have a taste of Hasoga Lukus, Hus, chapter 140. Very, very critical chapter, by the way. One of the, it really captures what Chassidus is. So he says, what does he say there? So remember, he said that when you actually see a Gashmizdika thing and it becomes a mushal, it's a nimshal, you see the Lukus b'muchish, because that thing is really a Lukus, just manifesting itself in a garment, so we can relate to it. Dover Mukhshi, as you put it there. So bottom line is that the ayat carries is relates to and has a relationship with the yesh, and that's where we are right now. So now we have two types of Hizbarnus, right? We have Hizbarnus Klali, that the yesh existence dictates that something is a source for it that cannot be itself, cannot be another yesh. It has to be something that is of a different personality. And two, we can also talk about that quality of that different personality, the ayin, which is the Hizbarnus Pratis. Now he's going to apply it. Where in the Aveda do we have this? This is in Aveda Satfil, in davening. Which part of davening? So now he's bringing us back to something we learned earlier. Let's read it inside and then we'll analyze it. Right, Baruch Sha'amar. So Baruch Sha'amar, which is like officially the beginning of Shachris, Sukkot Zimra. And we always stop after Haidu. Baruch Sha'amar is like, they say, okay, we're up to Baruch Sha'amar, right?
No turning back.
Yeah, and that's when you're not supposed to speak anymore, etc. So it's a stage in davening. It's officially, I think, the beginning of Sukkot Zimra. That's the beginning of Sukkot Zimra. Am I right?
Ashkenaz also starts with
they start.
Right, they start, right.
They say Haidu afterwards?
No.
Yeah, they say Haidu afterwards.
You do?
Yes. I think there's such an
Shabbos too? No.
I used to daven.
I'm a Karnat's boy.
I used to daven on Shemaz.
I mean,
I don't remember doing that.
Okay, but Baruch Sha'amar is universal. Everyone is Friday Mashnaz and Baruch Sha'amar is a Yisod in davening. So Zeu Arichas is bonus the Baruch Sha'amar. This is the Arichas is bonus. You hear? How fast do you do Baruch Sha'amar usually?
Boom.
And the rest of davening?
So this is Arichas is bonus of Baruch Sha'amar. So now the interesting thing is, I don't know if you recall, but I do, that in Baruch Sha'amar there were two interpretations in Ayin Beis itself. And it's interesting what the Rebbe Rashab does here, he brings both interpretations together. We discussed it back then, I don't know if you recall, but I'll refer to it now in a moment. But first let's read it and then we'll let's learn Pshat and then we'll make the connections. The Baruch Sha'amar, this Arichas is bonus of Baruch Sha'amar. So that's already revelation. That needs to be an Arichas is bonus in Baruch Sha'amar. Okay? The Baruch Sha'amar v'haya elam, that's what it means. Baruch Sha'amar v'haya elam, what does it literally mean? Baruch, blessed is the one that says, and with that saying he creates the world. Hu b'chinas amida da'ak. What Amar, who's saying? That's Amida of Adam Kadman. Amida of Adam Kadman. This was spelled out before in chapter 23, just for the record. Well, the Maila said, and here comes interpretation number 2. Remember then we learned there was one interpretation after the Tzimtzum and the other one was Baruch Sha'amar before the Tzimtzum, all the 5 levels of Shirat Rebekayach, how first there's the Hu.
13 Baruchs also 13, no?
Yeah, I talked about that too, but I didn't really go into detail. He spoke mostly the 5 levels of Baruch Sha'amar, Amar Elam, Baruch Hu, Baruch Emer Ve'esa.
Corresponds to Kel.
Then later he spoke about the correspondence. Yeah, he spoke like this. We'll go through it now, but just we'll do it not from memory here. He spoke of Baruch Sha'amar v'Haya Elam. Okay, Baruch Hu, Baruch Emer Ve'esa, Baruch Gezer Mekayim, Baruch Esa Bereshis. He didn't go into Baruch Marach Malaretz, Baruch Marach Malabriz. That is actually in Shari Tshuva, which and then he went to the end. If I recall correctly, he went. Did he bring? Okay, let's see what he does here. I'm not sure exactly.
But he brought up the reference regarding the 13 attributes of mercy.
No, he didn't send this. I don't think he
Did
said
you
it.
mention that?
No. But he's focusing mainly on the main beginning. So he says, so what's Baruch Hamira Da'ak? Well, the Maila Yeser, that's one is bonus. We'll soon discuss it. I'll explain in a moment. And higher, and this is chapter 69 and on. So 23 he mentioned Ak, 69 is this one, where the more arichas, the more length was from chapter 69. So he says, La Maila Yeser Baruch Shama Koi Al Malchus the Ein Seif. So refers to Malchus the Ein Seif, which is the Malchus of the 10 hidden spheres. For who in Hamida the Malchus Ein Seif Lias Yisav Ak. So the Amida here is not Ak speaking to lower than Ak. This is Malchus of Ein Seif speaking Lias Yisav Ak. Malchus Ein Seif dictating that there should be the creation of Ak. What's Ak in this case? Bechinas Adam de Bria. The Chlolos. The macrocosmic Adam of Bria. Which I shall again explain, but I'm sure you've already mastered it all, right? Let's just read what he says here, and then we'll go back to the reconciliations and all that. So in other words, when someone stamps says Pirush Hamilas, say Baruch Shama V'Haya Elam, blessed is the one who said and created the world. Okay, basically you're blessing God who created the world. Tasara Mamoris. Then you continue to say Baruch Hu, Baruch Emer Ve'esa. You really have nothing to think about if you're reading Pirush Hamilas. It sounds redundant. Blessed is He. Blessed is the one that says and does. Baruch Gezim, the one that decrees and sustains. Eisa Bereshis, that creates Bereshis. Someone re-asks a child and asks you, tell me, what's the difference between these different expressions? God creates. It's all about God creating. We have to say it 5 different ways. He said each one Baruch. So truth is, without some deeper Pirush Hamilas, this whole Baruch Shama doesn't make sense. And generally, you could ask the same question about davening. Davening sounds redundant. We keep saying God is great, He's good, He's nice, He's sweet, He's this and this.
Give multiple titles, not multiple titles, but like when you
introduce somebody. Because if not davening, because if not davening will be too short. Is that the reason? So we have to fill the time.
I'm just saying it's like more complicated.
In the human world, yes, maybe titles are coveted, but what's the point?
Who's davening, us or him?
That's a good enough answer for you. Then what can I tell you? Then fine. Now, in a chanami, if someone said to you when you meet somebody, I want you to introduce him as being a doctor, professor, lawyer, this, you'll say, how many titles does he need? Right? How many titles are you going to say? This is not just Baruch Shama. You go through this, you know how many expressions there are?
No, not only that, but
and
a lot of personality.
And tell me, so I asked you a question. But it says Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam.
Well, I'm saying, isn't
no. If it said here Hagadol, Hagibur, V'Haneira, even that you could say, okay, that's Gedula, Gvura, and here he's saying everything is this in a second. Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam, he spoke and V'Haya, and the world came. Baruch Eimer V'Esa, again Eimer and Esa. Is there really a difference? In Pirush Hamilas, of course, you start dying. It says Eimer V'Esa, here it says V'Haya Elam. But what's the difference? And Baruch Gezim Mekayim, Baruch Esa Bereshis, also Esa again. Bottom line is, Chassidus comes, which is really based on Kabbalah and the Zohar. That this is not just a human language where we just fill our word. You can just say one word, God, and you may be more connected to Eibishter than all the whole Siddur. It's an echazdik thing. It's a quality thing. It's not quantity. It's not about pouring on as many lines as we can. Not filling the time. I'm basically spelling out a very basic thing, which I wish, as I said, we were told this in yeshiva. When we read it, we saw this as just basically davening has to take a half. I remember I even asked one of my counselors, he gave me a slap. I said, I thought davening has to take a half hour because they have to prepare for breakfast or whatever. So they have to fill it up. So someone filled up pages. That was my sacrilegious thought. And I grew up with that type of attitude because I never heard anybody explain anything. We read. I understand, okay, the Kabbalah self standing before God and speaking. Don't get me wrong, I understand the value of just saying things. But then you start wondering, if you're a little seichel, what does it mean? You start, read it in English, my friend, and you tell me what it means. You're not going to find much value.
It doesn't make sense in English.
But you can even ask a question, what do you mean we're blessing?
The only thing I knew was that there must be something deeper, because I knew there were books on it, and I knew that this was not composed by simple people. This was composed by brilliant people who who laid it down, and so on. Tehillim too, by the way. Tehillim, most people, you can't even understand Tehillim, frankly, because it's very complicated writing. But Tehillim too. So they say it even without kavanah. This is the idea, is to say it without kavanah. The bottom line I'm trying to explain is that Chassidus not just enriches it makes it, and the whole thing begins to make sense. Everything here is a level. And that you understand that the only way to daven is like those Chassidim daven for hours. Because how else can you say Baruch Shamar without thinking through the difference between Baruch Shamar and Baruch Emer Ve'esa? Now I know this is not common in any community, because people don't have the time for that. That's a different issue. That's because the problem with people. That's not the problem with davening. I'm just pointing all this out. You have an alternative? I mean, lip service for me, I don't know. It never worked for me. I know, but you all do it. Then what do you mean work? That's what we do. I'm pointing out here that Rebbe Rashab is now applying himself and actually saying, as he did earlier, that each of these things are a level. So Baruch Omer Sha'omer V'Haya Elam is not just the general idea of God creating the world. There's an Amira, and the Amira does something. And V'Haya Elam is a different expression than when you say, let's say, Eisa Ma'isa Bereishis. It's a different level. And he explains the difference. I don't know if he says it here, but earlier for sure. Let's read what it says here, and then we'll supplement it. So what does he say? So now, one is Amira Da'ak. So his bonus is, you think about Ak. Ak is, we've spoken many times, Ak is like, think of it as the central, the blueprint. The whole picture, when we say, for example, in Hayem Yem, that everything's Ashgacha Pratis, even the leaf turning over in the wind, is all arose a machshava gduma da'ak. That's the word always used. Because Ak is already part of existence, but it's like the complete blueprint. Everything is encompassed in Ak. Ak is like sees everything till the end of generations, end of time, the whole picture. This has nothing to do with Bechira and free will. We already had a chapter that discussed, because Ak does not impact existence, it just sees existence. But Ak is think of it like the bird's eye view of the whole Shtalshlus. So that's why Ak is the first circle after the Kav. From the Kav comes the first big circle within the Cholol, within the space. The Eagle HaGadol is called the circle, the sphere outside is more the Erein Sov that was so called not removed, concealed. But Ak is the first snapshot of existence. There's a whole chapter we learned about Ak. If you really want to go back, you can really learn that. You understand Ak. So there's a stage where Ak itself now, once let's say the architect has his blueprint, blueprint. Everything in the structure is on this little sheet here. You look at the sheet, someone says, this is the structure of existence? No. But everything in existence is taken from here. So when we say, for example, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Eir, Vayhi Eir, what does that mean? Right? In the Chumash, also redundant. Why doesn't it just say Vayivra Elokim Eir? God created light. Vayomer Elokim Yehi Eir, He said there should be light. Vayhi Eir, and there was light. Like here, Baruch Sha'amar V'Hoya. Why do you need the Omar? What's the Omar? What's he saying? So Chassidus explains, and this is the meaning of Amira from Ak, that God looked into his blueprint, his Takel Baraisa. This blueprint was already originally written up by God, so to speak, before the Tzimtzumi envisioned it. Ak is the actual blueprint. So when it says Omar, he read. It says in his blueprint that he already had, the architect looks at his blueprint, it says Yehi Eir. It says Yehi Eir. So now we go and build Eir. So there's two stages. You can ask, why does he need the second? Why do you need these two stages? Why don't you just jump straight to God? Doesn't need a blueprint. An architect needs a blueprint. Because an architect, it's very, very difficult to create a building without first having a plan. God doesn't need all that. First of all, his plan and his actions go hand in hand, and it's immediate. That exactly. That's what he said a few lines before, because he wants a relationship. There's no relationship, of course he doesn't need it. He wants a relationship. He wants himself, godliness to apply itself. Like I said, Yehi Eir, Yehi Rakia, everything has a name. The name, your Hebrew name, gives you life. And he wants us to be able to retrace the steps and reconnect. That's why you have all these stages. That's why he said, that's why you have all these stages of the ayin. This is all the hisbonus of Baruch Shamar, what I'm saying right now. So we're saying Baruch Shamar v'Hoya Elam, you're explaining that God is implied, God who is beyond it all, is saying, he's reading this blueprint that he prepared, And he's in Ak, Amira of Ak, that there should be V'hoya Elam, there should be a world. And then the specifics of the world. That's one interpretation. If you want deeper Isbarnus and you have a little more time to daven, you say, okay, that's Pirush 1. Pirush 2, you go even higher. Where does Ak, the blueprint, come from? It also didn't start. Remember, it's all a relationship. So where's the root of the blueprint? The root of the blueprint is the 10 hidden spheres that God envisioned existence before He put it into a blueprint. Now, this itself you could sit and think about probably 6 hours. What's the difference between the blueprint stage and the one before the blueprint? Isn't Ak also is a Ruchnis Dika world? It's not a physical blueprint. And how is it different than the 10 hidden spheres? That's what you have to do today in davening, if you haven't davened yet. If you have, you'll do it tomorrow.
Isn't it?
It's not tomorrow, you'll do the next one. You don't get to the share. If you do this, you'll have better than the share.
Isn't the 10 hidden spheres way higher than Ak? Because isn't that like...
It's before the Tzimtzum, yeah.
But so, isn't it like, doesn't it relate more to that Eagle or Godel?
Yeah. But the question is, someone asked the question, what's the difference of how so-called the Amira of Ak and the Amira of Malchus of Ein Sof? What's the difference? So I'm reading it now. So here's a higher level. Ulamayla Mizeh, Ulamayla Yesa rather. So that's Amira Da'ak. It's very brief here, but I just elaborated and understand what he's saying. What means Amira Da'ak? Ulamayla Yesa Baruch Shamar. What means Omar? Who's Amira? Koi Al Malchus the Ein Sof. Who in Amira the Malchus the Ein Sof? Lias Isavas Ak. Because Ak, you also need someone to put the blueprint there. You understand? Who puts the blueprint there? A blueprint is Bria the close, because Ak already is also Bria in the general sense of the word. As I said, is the overall blueprint. Compared to the lower levels beyond below Ak, Ak is also part of the picture of existence. So who puts that there? Yeah. So that's another Amira. There's an Amira in Malchus. No, there's a lot of Amiras going on here. A lot of commands, basically. By the way, it's a perfect example. A good example is computer language. When you press a command, that's an Amira, right? But today you're pressing a button. There's you're triggering a whole series of commands. So there's a lot of Amiras till it gets to a physical paper printed out from a laser printer, right? You type a letter. You're not typing a letter. It's a signal. It's a trigger. Then you have it connected also to a printer. You can actually print out. So how many Amiras are there? Quite a number. Same idea you can apply to Shtalshlus. And that can maybe explain the difference. You see, Malchus Ein Sof is much more in the source code. It's like in the Mamish, in the machine language itself. In the divine essence, in the divine Eir Ein Sof, he begins to envision some type of existence. Ak is already a blueprint, some type of defined blueprint. I'm not explaining it, elaborating, because he's not explaining it here, the Rebbe Rashab, but something to think about. So the higher L'mayli Meisir is Malchus the Ein Sof, this is Savas Agkins Adam the Bria the Klolos. Now, that's Baruch Sha'amar. What's V'hoya Elam? So he says, V'zeu Sha'amar V'hoya Elam. So Baruch Sha'amar V'hoya Elam. The Sha'amar V'hoya Elam, the Malchus the Ein Sof, Nasa Keser V'atik La'ak. So the meaning, Baruch Sha'amar V'hoya Elam, is Sha'amar, Malchus, V'hoya Elam, the Malchus of Ein Sof becomes Keser and Atik of Adam Kadmon. So the Amira of Malchus the Ein Sof turns it into Hoya Elam. Something happens out of it. It's not just an Amira, he didn't just say it. Something emerges. What emerges becomes Keser and Atik of Ak.
Is it higher or lower than Ak?
You want the mathematical, what do you want? The geography?
Are we generally going up?
We're going down.
No, what?
Baruch Sha'amar V'hoya Elam is going down.
Yeah, but in the
interpretation.
Yeah,
but now he's explaining. Baruch Sha'amar, that Malchus speaks V'hoya Elam and creates Atik. Like it says, Keser and Atik of Ak. That's why that's going down. V'gam Baruch Sha'amar hu Amira Da'ak V'hoya Elam zeh. And now back to the first interpretation, which is also going down. V'gam Baruch Sha'amar hu Amira Da'ak. Baruch Sha'amar, as we said, is also the Amira of Ak speaking. Basically the same idea in just two different levels. That Baruch Sha'amar, a higher level, that speaks, that evolves and turns into a world. So it's either Malchus of Ein Sof speaking and creating Keser and Atik of Ak, which is the whole Seder Shtalshus really, or it's Ak speaking and creating Keser and Atik of Atzilus, lower level.
Between Ak and Atzilus, are there other levels?
Yeah, but in general terms, you speak in this terms. It doesn't always go through all those levels. You can go straight from Ak to Atzilus. If you start breaking down, you can say Ak is Bria de Klolos, and Akudim and Akudim is Yitzira de Klolos. Here he's going like this. It's common. Doesn't always go through all the levels. Remember, in the general picture, everything is Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. He basically wants to show here how it's both an Atzilus Klolos, Atzilus Pratis, or Bria Klolos, Bria Pratis. That's really what he's doing here. It's just two different ways of. There's two different dimensions of the same four. I'm sorry, 4 dimensions on completely 2 different planes.
So you're talking about. So you actually
Remember, there's the technical part of it, which I have no problem explaining. But if you really want to understand, you have to understand the Havana. The reason that you're not getting it is because you keep trying to memorize levels, right? Think about the idea, and you'll see it'll be far easier to understand. Forget about a map. Don't try to find it on the map, because there's no physical map.
This is Ak's existence, the blueprint of existence, which is it's a level. It's not Lifnei Atzimtzum. It's down.
It's after the Tzimtzum.
How do you compare it to Atzilus of Kolos and this and that, which is all Lifnei Atzimtzum?
This is he's doing it. He did it 50 times already in Ayin Beis. He keeps doing it. What do you mean? How do you compare? I understand what you're saying.
He's talking about levels.
First of all, who's comparing it? He says there's 2 interpretations.
So you have Ak Lifnei Atzimtzum also.
There's no Ak Lifnei Atzimtzum. It doesn't talk about Ak Lifnei Atzimtzum. You've never heard of 2. You see, because you think everything is everything, and not everything is everything. There's 2 different interpretations. There's 2 different interpretations in Baruch Shamar.
Yeah.
One is Ak speaking and creating that which is below it. Another is Malchus of Ein Sof speaking and creating Ak. What's the problem with that? What's missing? You want Malchus Ein Sof has to be Ak?
Threw you off when you say when you said Kolos and Protest, when you said
because he said Bria de Klolos, because essentially Malchus of Ein Sof is essentially Malchus of Atzilus de Klolos, which becomes Keser of Bria de Klolos. That makes sense? Okay. Then there's another thing. Then Malchus of Ak Malchus of Bria de Klolos becomes the Keser of Yitzira and Asiya de Klolos. You want to put it this way: Asiya de Klolos is Atzilus, the Pratis. Then it goes again. Malchus of Ein Sof, Atzilus, becomes Biyah. That's where it's exactly as you like it. Malchus of Ein Sof is similar to Malchus of Atzilus. That's correct, but that's not what he's saying here. Now that's also constantly. Remember how many times have I pointed out that you see clearly many Maimorim. I could show you again and again. I emphasize it every time because I also stop every time. He moves constantly back and forth from Malchus of Ein Sof to Malchus of Atzilus. Even in the Baruch Shammah, if you remember, he said everything was in the higher level. He said, here, there's a chapter here that says, I think it's chapter.
I have no problems with that. I have problems more with defining Ak in terms of
Here,
that was
if you look in chapter Ayin Gimel, page Kuf Lamed Vav, after he explained the 5 levels of Baruch Shammah, he says, remember that? So clearly, there's everything, because remember, till here, if you want to ask a bigger question, till here we've been discussing about Atzilus and Biyah. We weren't talking about Lifnei Atzimtzum. But that's not a problem, because they always they're always replaceable. Whatever happens in Malchus of Atzilus happens in Malchus of Ein Sof. Yeah. But interchangeable with a big qualification. They're not the same level. They're just a replay on a far more subtle level in the higher. We say 10 hidden spheres does not mean the 10 spheres of Atzilus. They're very, very different. But the Dakus, in a subtle way, the 10 hidden spheres compared to the higher levels than the 10 hidden spheres is like Atzilus compared to the levels before it. So that you can say. As I said, the problem is we have very difficulty even understanding Asiya Ruchnis. So we talk about all these levels, it just becomes, for me, that's the biggest frustration. Because we're just talking words here. Nevertheless, we try our best. So there we go. So that's V'hoya Elam. So Ak becomes Hoya Elam Malchus Dag, that's the Kesser Atik Latzilus. Baruch Hu, then comes the next step is Baruch Hu. Zebchins Kesser Aprati Datzilus. Baruch Hu is already now the Kesser Aprati of Atzilus. The specific Kesser of Atzilus. We learned all this earlier. And afterwards he counts Cheshev Proti Madregas the Esser spheres Atzilus. He counts all the specific 10 spheres and levels of the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Ad Baruch Marachem al Habriyas. Till Baruch Marachem al Habriyas. She'abchins Malchus the Atzilus. That's the level of Malchus the Atzilus. Shenasa Keter v'Atik lebriya. That becomes Keser and Atik lebriya. So here he's not interpreting Baruch Shem v'Hayelam and Malchus the Atzilus. Baruch Marachem al Habriyas. Briyas is briya. So who's Marachem al Habriyas? No. That's Malchus of Atzilus speaking to briya, or communicating, relating to briya. He doesn't spell out all the other spheres. I think earlier also he did not. So Baruch Shem v'Hayelam would be Ak speaking to briya, to Atzilus. Baruch Hu is Keser. Emer v'Eser is probably Chochmah and Bina. Is Mekayim. Okay. All the levels are here. I'm going to compare it in a moment to what we learned before. The Kolzo Yeridas Ha'ayin Alaki. Now remember, he said before, we said the Ayin Alaki, the divine Ayin, applies itself and it relates to existence. So now he just spelled out all the levels of Baruch Shamar are telling us those levels. The Kolzo B'chinas Eir Alaki Yishach Ala Eilmus V'hainu Mashanimded. Like you said before, remember before the words Baruch Shem, what did he say? What are that? That's the arichas of Baruch Shamar. So Baruch Shamar is focusing how the Ayin Eliki communicates and relates to existence in all the levels he just said. Starting from Haya Elam, Baruch Shamar V'Elam, all the way till Malchus Avatzilus going to into Biyah. It's all included in the first 5 lines of Baruch Shamar. He didn't spell it out in detail, but in general. So all this is what? Here we go. That all of this is Mashanimdad Me'ere Yisei Baruch Hu. What was measured from the infinite divine light. That it should have a relationship. In other words, in the infinite possibilities of the divine energy, he measured and allocated the Shir Atzmei basically. Allocated a certain element that should have a relationship with existence. That has many levels, many distinct levels in the order of progression, in the order of transmission. Do we continue on, or do you want me to elaborate more on the Baruch Shamar and the earlier discussion on it? Let me say a few things about that. I'm going to go back now for a moment to page, let's say, Perek Chav Gimel. Where's Perek Chav Gimel? So Chassidus, there's 2 different interpretations of Baruch Shamar as we just saw. One is on a higher level in Lifnei HaTzimtzum, and the other one is after the Tzimtzum. Here he combines the 2, which is very nice because it reconciles them. So the first place he brings it, I'll just refer to Perek Chav Gimel. Chapter 23, that would be page 37. So actually, you know what he's talking about then? About Baruch. Remember the letters, Baruch, Beis, Reish, Vav, Chav. So he says like this, look at the top. So what does it say? He's talking about the kavan and the word Baruch. So he says, Te Baruch Baruch Sha'amar V'haya Elam Shahaya Muvim Mehem Askal Mufla. From those words, we have a Haskalah Mufla, a wondrous, an awesome concept. That with just speaking alone, Nivru Kala Elam is Bli Amal V'Yagila, or Bli Amal V'Yagia. All the words were created without any effort or exertion. El Aldera Chutziv V'Nivro. Baruch Sha'amar, he speaks for Haya Elam. Okay, he doesn't mention that here. But what is the next line? Ubesharshe B'chinas Amida Da'ak. In the root, this is Amida of Ak. Shenivru B'y Kala Elam is B'Hashva. K'mashakos B'Sidr B'Pirish Baruch Sha'amar. Equally. When Amida, as I said, when he spoke Ak, it's like the blueprint. The Amida of Ak, the just general creation of everything. It's like Breishis Bara Lekim. V'reishis nami maimeru. That's usually the Amira of Ak. And then come the 10 Mamoras, the 9 Mamoras. So you see here exactly this taich. And where does it come from? B'siddur Baruch Sha'amar. Okay, that's one, my friends. He continues on. Why do we bench Hashem? I might as well add this. So why do we say Baruch Shamar? The bracha is that we want to bring out this Hamshacha Lamata. That this Amira should be manifest all the way below. That's the Gil of Maimer Echad, which is Kel, this is Bereshit, that encompasses all the Tesman Maris. That's all that's relevant. Now I refer you to chapter 69. 69, which is page Kuf Chavtes 129, and this is even more relevant. But here is the higher interpretation, and here it went on. This goes on all the way, just for the record, all the way to chapter Kuf Lamed Ches, to chapter Ayin Daled. So there, for 5 chapters, that Rebbe Rashab explains Baruch Shamar, the 5 levels of Baruch Shamar. We learned it in depth then. So I'll just read it quickly, not all 5 chapters, just the beginning of it. So he's talking there about how Keser Atzilus. Remember, he talked about how the difference between Eris Makifim and Eris Pnimim. So there's Keser. So he spoke that there's a Keser of each world has an impact on existence. Okay? Okay. So he says that just like Keser, so. One second, let me just see something. Yeah. He spoke about the Keser of Ak, then he spoke about the Keser of. That's where he speaks about Ak at length. Then he says, now, in the Keshem, the Keser Atzil Surat, there's also a Keser of Bria, and there's a Keser for each world. So the Tchila Haya Kol Kol Machshava Dumadak, Sh'ol Shom Kol Elmas Vishtalshus V'Kol Haya Bashva. Like we just said, the Amira of Ak. V'achakach Nimshachur Etzenis Pratis L'Chol Elam Befrat, V'huyin Keser de Bria V'Keser de Yitzira Ad Keser Dasiya. Right? So now we have a Keser for each world. There's a general Keser of all of existence, is Ak. But each world has its own Keser. Right? Like we just learned here. It talks about the Keser Prati of Atzilus, that's Baruch Hu, right? So now watch this. Okay. So here he starts explaining what that means, and he explains it with Baruch Shamar. I just want to skip where's the Pirush in Baruch Shamar. So you go a little further down.
5 lines from the bottom.
5? Yeah. No, more than 5.
More. 8 lines.
P'rei Shomanus de Malka. The closing Hope Psukkah talks about the creation and the sustenance of existence of the world. Okay. So he goes into the whole explanation and starts explaining Baruch Sha'amar in detail here. Now, this, as you'll see, he's talking here, just trying to find exactly the right words here. Anyway, this Amida is talking about the Amida that creates the Ratzon, the desire for existence. This is not Ak anymore. The higher level. I'm just trying to find exact words so you can see it.
It's the original Amira, like chapter 1.
No, not for chapter 1. Chapter 1 is...
Creates God's desire for...
Okay, let's go to chapter Ayin. That's where it's clear. Look at the next chapter, 70. Now we're talking about the Ratzon that God desired there should be existence. Right?
Yeah.
A second.
It says over here.
One second.
Ayin.
That's what I'm going to read now. One second. Just want to read something. 1 second. Okay, so no.
He says over here,
Yeah, but here's he's going to say it even more. Listen to this now. So this is a desire. This is the Ratzon. One who just saying he's Zeba Helam. It's a Helam. So this is a desire, Ratzon for existence. Baruch Shem V'Hayelam, but it's not yet revealed even to himself. That's what he says here. And then after the parentheses, on the next line he says, "V'zeu inyan Baruch Hu shulam shachas hahelam elagili." Who already shows there's a helam elagili. Something is coming out and revealed at least to himself. Okay. V'hu inyan ashara b'keach kol ma she'asad liyas. So Baruch Hu is the ashara b'keach. What he called here, Baruch Hu, he called here, what did he call Baruch Hu? No. The Kesser of Atzilus Prati, right. Kesser of Atzilus Prati. So Malchus and Sev is the Amira. It's a little different actually. This is different than what he said here. Because here he says the Amira is Malchus of Ein Sof, and here he says the Amira is the Ratzon before there's the Gili, the Ratzon, which is Ashar B'Kayach. Hold on a second. And then I think the levels after Baruch Hu, there we go. On the bottom, then it says, V'zeu she'amar Baruch Eimer ve'esa. That is, Aschol se'emer she'amar stam p'nei she'en she'ech l'dayan l'asiyah. Rak Eimer she'amar ve'emer she'u ratzon l'en she'ech l'asiyah. Eimer ve'esh yes l'zeh she'ech l'asiyah. Eimer l'zeh b'chinas machshov l'shen Anyway, bottom line is, this is very similar to what he's saying here. Not exactly every particular level there. It's spelled out much more, what we're learning now. See, here it says at the end of the chapter, Ayin, look, V'hainu, V'achar Baruch Eisa Bereishut B'chinas Asiyah D'Klot Hainu El Ma'atzilus. And then in chapter Ayin Aleph, look, he says there are 5 madregas. He spells out the 5 levels.
Yeah, he took it higher. This is...
Yeah. Biyaha Klolim. He calls the 3 lower levels Biyaha Klolim. Okay, let's go back here. Fine. So all this is about the Ayin Alikiyah, Shach Le'elm, and because there's all these levels in the relationship of the Ayin Aliki, the divine Ayin, with existence. Because of this, there's also differences by Elamus, There's also differences in the worlds that are shaped and created from the Ayin. So just like the Ayin Eliki, the divine energy itself has gradations and progresses in order to apply itself and to connect and relate to existence. So also in the worlds that are existent are also their levels. That because they're a result, they're a product of this Ayin. Because in the descent of the Ayin Eliki from level to level, as it descends and diminishes, or it doesn't say diminishes, as it descends from level to level, in each level and level, Nesav Meza Elamus. As the Ayin Eliki goes through its stages, like from Baruch Shama V'Haya Elam to Baruch Hu to Baruch Emer V'Esa, all these levels that we just discussed, from Malchus of Ein Sof to Malchus of Ak. I'm sorry, Ak, Malchus of Ak, and then the Kesser and all the worlds. Each level creates worlds that are commensurate. Shalifi Eifin Ayin Eliki. So it's not just that Ayin. It means the structure of existence is being measured by the flow of the Ayin as it goes through its relationship, because it has a relationship. So therefore, there are different levels. And this is both in the Biyah Klolim, in the general Biyah, Va'aku Adam Bria de Klolis, and Aku's Adam the Bria de Klolis, as we just learned. The Yesh Adam the Yitzir of Adam the Asiyah de Klolis, and we also have Adam of Yitzira or Adam of Asiyah de Klolis. When we say Adam, we mean the patzuf, a full structure. Generally speaking, Yitzira de Klolis is Akudim Nekudim, sometimes it's Atik and Arich. And Adam da Asiyah is Atzilus Bri Yitzira Abiyah HaProtim. V'hein be'elam is Biyah HaProtim. And also v'hein, both in this world and in the worlds of the more microcosmic Bri Yitzira Asiyah. So as we discussed, and I'll just summarize it again. There's a mimer from the Alter Rebbe called Drush Gimel Mine Adam. It's called. So Drush about 3 different types of Adam, 3 levels of Adam, which is these 3. And the Tzemach Tzedek has a long gloss, elaborates on that mimer. It's printed today, and there he goes through the whole structure of Seder Shtalshlus and explains these 2 levels which you find in Zohar and in Kisvei Arizal. There's Abiyah of Klolos and there's Abiyah Protis. And we've talked about it many times. Think of it microcosm, macrocosm. So everything divides in the structure of Atzilus Bria Yitzira Asiyah, with Atzilus being always an emanation, and Bria being a new entity. As I've discussed many times, new and emanation is only a term to explain whether something has the personality of the divine or it's of a new personality, so to speak, something that does not reflect in a revealed way consciously the divine. So Atzilus, the Klolos, is generally the air, the lowest levels of the air before the Tzimtzum. Bria de Klolos is Ak, Adam Kadman. Yitzir de Klolos, as I just said, is either Akudim and Akudim, or Atik and Arich of Atzilus. And Asiyah de Klolos is Atzilus Bria Yitzir Asiyah of Protim. That's in the macrocosm. In the microcosm, the same thing plays itself out with Atzilus. The Atzilus we always talk about is Atzilus de Protis, and Bria Yitzir Asiyah is Biyah de Protis. So he's basically saying this Ayin Eliki that we just are talking about, as he just explained, these 2 different ways. Baruch Shama V'Haya Elam could be what? If you're talking in the level of Klolos, so it's Bria de Klolos. Ak is saying it. If you're talking not Protis, but they're talking even
You said there were 3 different ones. We just mentioned 2.
there are only 2.
Oh, okay.
3 what? It's only either microcosm or macrocosm. No, there's no 3. There's 3 worlds. There's 4 worlds. 4, 3. And so basically this Ayin Eliki is on both terms. I guess Amir the Ak is more maybe the Protis. Yeah, because it's Bria de Klolos. Okay. Or you say it's going on Malchus of Ein Sof. Yeah, the first one's on Protis. When you say the Ak is going on Amir the Ak, you're talking about the worlds in Protis. So Ak then is the all-encompassing picture, and it is creating the Protis Dikatzilus Bria Yitzir Asiyah. When you talk Klolos, then it's Malchus of Ein Sof. that it is the one that's Amira, and then that creates Keser Atik of Bria de Klolos, which is Ak, and the other levels that come afterwards, all the way to Keser of Atzilus, as he said, which is Baruch Hu. 1 second. And by the way, it is different than earlier. I got to figure out why he's like a third interpretation here in Baruch Shamar. Because what we just read, Samach Tes, is not the interpretation here. Samach Tes is even higher than here. It's like 3 levels of interpretation of Baruch Shamar now I see. One is Baruch Shamar is Ak is speaking, the other is Malchus of Ein Sof is speaking, and the third Baruch Shamar is Eir Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum, even before he has a Rotzen. That he's aware. No, it's a different 3. But so there's really 3 interpretations of Baruch Shamar. So really he's not bringing them together. It's not chapter 1.
Chapter 2.
It's not even that. It's not that.
Olam Klalam are like sources for Olam Pratim?
I don't know what you mean by that. Everything is a source for everything. So yeah, you can say that in general about anything. Atzilus is a source for Biyah. So Ak is no, we don't look at it that way. It's different names, it's different ways how you structure Shtalshlus. If you took on the big picture, you're talking a microcosm, a small picture. You know what microcosm, macrocosm is?
I know it's micro and macro.
No.
Micro means it's a small scale.
It sounds like small and big.
Let's say if you talk about a human body, you talk about everything in the human body. Let's say you take one cell from the body, and in that cell you have the whole structure of the whole body in there. So it all depends whether you're talking the big picture or you're talking the micro picture. Do you understand what I just said?
No, it's all English.
Even let's say a drop of water reflects the sun in it, but so does the whole ocean. So you're talking about the ocean or the drop of water. That's the difference between microcosm and macrocosm. So everything includes everything. It depends whether you're talking in the detail or in the general.
Hologram.
Right. So that's what these degradations, this progression of the Ayin Aliki, is what creates the world, both in the Klolos and the Pratim. That's what he says. The Kol Zeh Ba'od Alikish Achrat Tzimtzum. And all this is in the reflection, the divine reflection that's after the Tzimtzum. Sheyesh B'zeh Chilukim Madregas. That's where there are different levels. V'achiluk, and what divides Ba'efon Hagilui, the Madregal Yena Ayinu B'chinas Gili El Yeser. And the difference is that in the form of the revelation, in a higher level, the Ayin Aliki, the Ayin, that divine force is more revealed. Increasingly, like in the world of Bria, there you have a revelation of this Ayin Aliki, like it says elsewhere. That's why Bria is higher than Yitzira. Both. And a lower level, the energy is not that revealed. That's why here the ayin gets closer to and becomes a source for the existent being. Okay. So essentially what he said to sum up is that there's this bonus klali, which is in general to realize that the yesh has an ayin. This bonus prati, more specifically, is to understand the personality of the ayin, because the ayin has a relationship with us, and that relationship, it gets closer and closer as it gets closer to our existence. And each level has its own particular dimension and revelation, and that's what Baruch Shamar spells out, all those levels. And those levels is what creates the gradations, the levels of the different worlds of existence, both in the macrocosm and the microcosm, and dependent on the level of revelation. All this is part of the hisbonus that we have to bring out Ava V'yira. Now in this contemplation, Hagam Shelo Yeh Pratis, even though there will not be a particular feeling or emotion, specific emotion that will come out of this. So even though when we contemplate on what we've just learned, contemplate on it, on all the levels, you won't have a particular emotion, in other words, love or awe, but there will be, through this, a kiruv delikus b'chlal. You'll feel a closeness to godliness in general. like I said earlier, like I said yesterday when we learned, because what do we think about most of the time? We think about material stuff, survival, immediate needs. The fact that we are applying ourselves to contemplate on godliness in general, and specifically how the Ayin Eliki goes through all the stages to give us a sustenance and to bring us into being, he says, even if no particular emotion, it won't be a particular emotion will come out of this, but there is a kiruv. You'll have a generally being drawn and attracted, and a closeness. You'll sense a relationship to this Elokus.
Why would that be Ava?
He's not calling it the midah because
He doesn't mention that yet.
no, he's going to go into that, of course. He's just saying that at this point it's too general yet to probably be a particular feeling. I'm not sure. We'll see. This is called hachkikim ebachutz. Okay, so he's introducing now a new line which I believe we did learn once earlier. I don't remember where. This one I don't remember. Much earlier. I think there was hachkikim bachutz, hachkikim ebifnim. Let me explain what it is.
Okay,
No, it wasn't on Kalim. It wasn't on Kalim.
Yeah,
No, it wasn't that.
Grave.
It's an Aveda. Achikim b'chutz and b'pnim is Aveda words. It refers to like this. We are, in this material world, we are what's called a chomer gas. Raw, crass piece of matter. And we need chiseling, shall we say. Right? Like planing. In the carpentry they call it the plane. To smooth things out. To refine. So there's, when you take make a pottery, when you start turning the clay into a pot, it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, it happens with stages. First stage is you have to take the whole clay and just make you have to shape it, the outer dimension of it, into the shape of what the keli is going to be like. The next stage is once you have the outer, they work on the inner, on really refining the inside so it should be a proper container. So you always begin on the out and you work in. So chakikim b'chutz means the first thing you have to do is chisel off all those masons, those extra scraps, and the things that the ego, the roughness, the toughness, the rough edges basically, that personality that are untamed. You have to tame the elements. You have to tame the outer dimensions of a person. This means behavioral change, habits, things we do that are not refined. Like even with children, you teach them habits before they understand it all. You tell them this is how we eat, this is how you hold a fork, how you hold a spoon, how you say thank you, how you behave. It's chakikim b'chutz. You're refining essentially the outer, the behavioral side of a person. Then there's chikim b'fnim, which is going to get to now, which is far more inner work. So all this that he just said gets you at least out of the crass, material, raw place you were in, because instead of thinking about yourself and your needs, you're thinking about God, but not just in general that there's a God. That Yesh dictates there must be. See, that's why that's why he made such a case. Why can't you just say the Yesh is here forever? What's the problem with that? Why couldn't God create the Yesh? It should be forever. Because then we would worship ourselves. We would give ourselves an element of eternity that materialism doesn't deserve and doesn't have. It's not eternal. Materialism, by definition, is not an eternal entity. It's a temporary entity. It doesn't have any substance of its own. So the hizbonus to realize that a yesh cannot go forever is a humbling experience of realizing this is not reality. That alone is what makes the chakikim b'chutz. And then when you think more and you mizbein and you contemplate, what is the ayin like? That there's all these levels of ayin, and it applies itself to me. So it's not just, it's easy. For example, let's say says you stop by this hizbonus close, say the yesh is not reality and God is reality. Fine. And it put us here. But we got a problem then if there's no relationship with the ayin. You know why? Because then God is in a place that's completely mysterious and distant. Okay, fine, you're there. All we can say is we're garbage, we're worthless. Remember, in davening, you learn to think about two things: shiflus ha'adam and gadlus ha'kel. Not just how lowly the human being and materialism is, but also the greatness of Hashem. How I mean greatness? We have no relationship with Him. That's why He said that ayin has to have a relationship, because when you have a relationship, then you get refined. So the two things can happen. You could either, the first step, just to think that there's an ayin of the key, yes, it tells you how low you are and there's something far more real. But that doesn't refine you. That just tells you you're worthless. That's like the Musar approach. That we're inferior human beings, we're made of flesh and blood, we'll turn into worms, and so on, and we're valueless. That's step one, perhaps to understand that there's something, but there's a higher reality much more valuable than us. But then you want a relationship with that value. You want it to come back to your life, so it's worth living and worth refining yourself. Because if you end up being demoralized to the point where you're just ashmata, you're just worthless garbage, that may be a step some people need to shock them out of the system. They realize that. But that has a very big risk. It's like what he says in Tanya, atzvos. That leads to depression. That can lead to a very negative, that's equally Yetzer Hara oriented. That you have no drive, you have no interest, you're demoralized. Demoralization is never healthy. God didn't create us to be demoralized. He created us to realize humility, anova, is not shiftless. As we know, humility means you exist, you have value, you know your value, but you know that it's not my own. It was given to me by God, like Moshe Rabbeinu. If someone else had received the same qualities, they would have done better than I. That's shiftless. Is a person who says low self-esteem. He doesn't even think he has any value altogether. That's not the goal. So that's why this Ayin Elokee is important to know. Okay, the yesh. We know we have to establish that the yesh is not reality because people are worshiping themselves. We worship the God. Our gods are ourselves. Our gods are our money. Our gods are our power, science, our wisdom. We worship the golden calf. So the first thing is to realize the yesh, my friends, is limited. The yesh itself dictates that it does not have true eternal power. As we said earlier, it's a murkev. It's made up of other parts. It can't go on infinitely because it's finite. Then you come to contemplate on the specifics that the ayin applies itself to us and cares about us, and every level is tailored. So it's like, think of it not just a great father who's so distant that I'm in awe of, but now the father is also applying himself. He bends himself down to each level and brings down elikus, one level, the next level, next level. This now creates a kiruv. As I said, if one without the other, you wouldn't have that. If the yesh thought it was self-made, obviously it remains in its crass, narcissistic place. If it sees that God is so distant and no relationship, then what does it have? It just remains ashma, demoralized. So you need to have that. There's also the other element, there's the ayin that you can contemplate on, you can relate to, and level by level, and that creates a kiruv. That's why I think he's saying there's no ava v'yira yet, because he's not yet getting into a specific relationship. What's the relationship with God? It's just that there is a relationship, and that the relationship gets closer based on the levels of revelation. That's called chikim b'chutz. When the person does this right, you will be a little more refined, a little, as they say, edeler than you when you entered. A bissel a tefach hecher. Okay. No, I wouldn't use that word here. He doesn't use it. I wouldn't use that word. It's not Kabbalah sel. This is his bonus. Not necessarily. Why? Because as soon as a person does what I just said properly, they will be more refined because there's a closeness to a spiritual state instead of a material state.
But if you don't have my question, I guess, was motivated because if you don't yet have Ava and Yira, then.
You asked me technical. I don't know. I don't relate. You asked me a mathematical question.
I didn't think it was.
Does this create a sense of closeness or not? That's what's relevant.
I think that we haven't yet got the sense of closeness. We haven't yet got the Ava and Yira.
He does say. He says kiruv elikus.
You just laid it out beautifully.
Kiruv elikus. You have a kiruv elikus. Look.
You don't have Ava and Yira yet.
Do you know what Ava Yira is? Maybe this is Ava, like he said. Frankly, to me, this would be, if I reach this, I'd also, it's a pretty nice level of Avos Hashem, but compared to his standards, you see, you're using the word Ava Yira. He just used what he said here. What does Ava Yira by you mean?
Ava would be the motivation to come close, to have something you want to come close to.
That's what he said is kiruv. I don't think that's Ava Yira. What you're talking Ava Yira is what he calls kiruv here. Ava Yira is far more than what you think it is. It's not what you think it is. Most people don't. I've never met a person that has Ava and Yiras Hashem.
No?
Maybe. Not really. People who have spiritual people, yeah, and people who are fine people. Remember, it has to be not mechanical. I'm not talking about someone who grew up with it and mechanically doing it. Maybe it's not Yiras Hashem, maybe it's a nice culture. Not so simple. I saw acts of Avos. I'm talking about Avos, I'm talking about a person who's in that state. I don't mean an act. Of course, people do things all the time. But anyway, he calls this Kiruv Elikus not Kabbalah style. He calls this a Kiruv of Elikus, and it's a Chikim Mebachutz.
Well, obviously, that.
Let's see where he goes with Avavir. You're applying now your own understanding of Avavir, not what it says.
Certainly true. That's what I'm
So we'll see. He hasn't finished. Look, there's pages.
I thought you mentioned we weren't yet out of the year.
He says clearly, he said it right here. That even though from this will not come a specific midah, but overall it's going to create a kiruv lalakuz b'chlal. That's what he's saying here.
So that was why I asked if it was
So it's not Avavir. So he's not there yet.
It's not Avavir. It's not Kabbalah.
Scratching the surface.
It's kiruv mibachutz. I don't know what the Kabbalah says altogether. Kabbalah sel means nothing here. Kabbalah sel, you don't need his bundles. Kabbalah sel, you just do. There's no contemplation.
Then let me restate the question. If you would stop at this point, would there be a greater motivation for Torah mitzvahs? Is there more chayas in Torah mitzvahs?
I would say yes. Yeah. If a person's closer. Right, he's in the middle of a subject matter. Don't bring in other ideas now, then you'll be fine. Yeah, in the beginning read the beginning of the chapter. Of course it'll bring him, because a person is more refined. Put yourself in the shoes of what he just said here. Imagine you had this contemplation. What do you think it would do to you?
I don't know.
Well, maybe try it once in a while. The answer is, he says, it would refine you. It would like chisel and refine, because it's just simple. You're not thinking of yourself and materialism, you're thinking of godliness. And you're thinking how godliness relates to you. Now let's continue. V'hainu, which means which means that through the contemplation and the feeling in the nefesh, in the spirit, in this divine ayin, which creates the yesh that we said earlier, because it's not itself made. There's something that's putting you that's far more refined than you are. Not a yesh that made a yesh, an ayin that made a yesh. That's the whole point of ayin. It's not like, someone will say, I have no problem with a God that looks like me. That might as well be you. That's an Avodah Zarah. It's a God in your image. We're talking about something not you. Right? Like you said before. And especially the quality of this divine ayin, this divine substanceless force. And all the details of creation that came from it, which he explained. Baruch Shamar Ak, and Malchus of Ein Sof, and Keser of Atzilus, and Biyah, and Haklolim, and Aprotim. That's why he brought it all. When you contemplate on all that, he becomes very close. You become very close. You become miskadav. You assume a closeness. Miskadav. You get close, very much to godliness. V'nitak min kol ha'inyanim achunim, and you sever your ties. You get cut off from all the things that are crass and coarse. As I said, someone that does this properly. Because just think for a moment. Instead of the next half hour, you're not thinking about yourself, your needs, your food, your money, your covet, your sexuality, the list goes on. Everything that we are so involved in. And you're just thinking about godliness, about something that's a completely different reality than Gashmis. And that put existence here. And that not only put existence here, but it's a quality that's completely different than ours, the Eichus. Very different than we are. Completely different. And that it has a relationship with us. And you think about all the levels that it brings into being, the Rebbe Rashab is guaranteeing that will make your Edel person more refined, very close, and you'll be cut off, at least for that moment, for those from Gashmis and Ruchnis, because you won't value it. Now, of course, as you see, Chassidim have had this. Usually, unfortunately, they had this type of Mesiras Nefesh usually when it was under the gun, far more than when we have comforts. Mesiras Haratzon is harder than Mesiras Nefesh B'Gashmis. So when the Frierdiker Rebbe told that guy who pointed the pistol at him that it can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone that has one God and many worlds or two worlds, That's what it meant. When Chassidim went to Mesilas Nefesh, they were ready to forego their own comforts and their own gashmis, and died for their faith. Jews in general, what was going on? Gashmis, they realized, it was ingrained in them that Gashmis was not as valuable. Now, that doesn't mean we give it up, but we have no choice. It's not eternal. Today, it's far harder because we're living in comfort. It's far harder to have such dedication when we're comfortable. No one's forcing us no one's oppressing us, no one's challenging us. So today, it has to come willingly from within. It's far harder to break ourselves from our so-called the material tentacles. One second. But the only way to do it is, that's why Chassidus, when a person contemplates and connects themselves to godliness in this way, it refines them. They become more refined. Look, at the end of the day is, we are what we think and what we do, what we act, what we speak and what we act. When a person thinks and is immersed and has passion in more refined things, it has to make them a more refined person. It's an inevitability. It doesn't mean it lasts always. Obviously, you always need to maintain it. But that's the first step. Immerse yourself in refined things, you become more refined. Immerse yourself in grubba things, you become more grubba. It's simple as that. So, I mean, you don't even need Ayin Beis for that. He's speaking here more the specific of how to do it. But that's a given that's how it is. It depends where your passion is. Where most people's passion. That's the problem. That's where it begins. So Chassidus is an alternative, which is, you learn Chassidus, Bimizbein and these things. It has to elevate you and refine you. There's still challenges. We have still a Yetzer Hara. We still have to go back and do something with it. But this is the first step. That's what he says. We'll soon get to the deeper levels. But he's explaining essentially how Moichin is affecting Midas, basically. That's the key thing here. Going back to what we're learning. What the Ovis accomplished, how Moichin, how contemplation refines your Midas. That's the key here. Refines the Midas of the animal soul, like he said in the beginning of the chapter. And of course enhances the performance of your mitzvahs. But we're not done yet. That's what he said here. It's a very personal chapter, this. The Rebbe Rashab is speaking very, now he's speaking Aveda. He's not just speaking a concept. He's talking about all that we learned. Meichen Shaykh Tamidis, Yisrael Saba V'Tfuna, the whole thing he's now bringing into Aveda. The closeness of Atzilus to Biyah. Yeah, I'm listening. Go ahead.
Maybe I'm jumping the gun, and maybe he's going to go through this later. I'm not going to read it, but if you talk about Shema and Shemona Esrei, it gets very materialistic. Here it's very flowery, and you seek out His strength and this and that, and the whole pursuit of Zimri is very, very spiritual. All of a sudden you hit and you say Shema, and you'll get crops and this and grain, and you ask for your things there in Shemona Esrei.
It's a good question. But first of all, let's just distinguish something. In Shema is as sublime as Baruch Shema, if not far more.
In the beginning, but
it's not just the beginning. Shema and Nohaya Shemaya are completely two different parshas, and the Gemara has a whole thing. This is Kabbalah Sel Mitzvah, this is Kabbalah Sel Machal Shemayim. You're talking about two. Shema, you can't compare to Nohaya Shemaya. Shema. Now, remember, Shema, the general answer to your question is as follows. There's a lot of stages in Aveda here. There's one stage of going in and connecting to godliness and refinement. Then there's bringing that refinement back out into the world. So Shema is Yichud Ilah, Baruch Shem, and Vayim Shema is Yichud Tatah, which means that first you go and connect to Hashem, you say Echad, not Yochid, and then you bring that Achdus and all the high levels back into existence. That's why you have the grain and the Shenantam Levanecha, and bring it into mitzvahs and to specifics. So the goal is, you're just talking about different stages in Aveda. I wouldn't pile it all into one thing. Judaism is far richer than just a contemplation about the divine unity, or about the bittul, or what we're talking here. He's talking the beginning of Baruch Shamar, which essentially is getting yourself into the mode of a divine state, as opposed to a Megushim Dika state. But the goal is not going to be to remain there. You're going to have to bring it out into the world, because that's the kavanah Dir B'Tachtenim. So you're just talking about different elements, but it is a combination, because ultimately the biggest chiddush is when you can go back to Vasafta Diganecha, to the grain, and still in a state of this type of bittul.
Right.
That's the chiddush. What the Meraglim didn't want. That's the hardest part. be a state of such high consciousness and still be involved in Elam Hazeh? Because only one reason. Because God wants you there, not because you're having pleasure from it. It's a different way of eating cholent.
Like Baruch Hashonim, you're supposed to take a yayin.
Oh yeah, the tfuasa, yeah, but that's just the second half of where you bring it back down. He's not there yet. That's a whole different side of it. So that's what his bonus does. It's very nice. So next time any of you or any of us get consumed with a little chumris, just read this line here. Read it. The near future or the distant future. Okay. So read chapter Kuf Nun 150. It's a very easy chapter to remember. Number 150. Just remember the number 150. And open it up and read, and then say, and then the Rebbe Rashab is promising Miskarav Me'ed Le'Lukus, Me'ed, not just Miskarav. V'nitik Mekol Inyanim Achumim. The Rebbe is a promise.
That's the hard part. The nitik himself.
No, you didn't say kasher.
Yeah.
That makes it a lot easier.
Listen to this. More than that. And he leaves. He departs from. What was the word I removed? What would say Yaitse? Bezeh. He exits. But there's no Yaitse Bezeh. He emerges. Not emerges. Yeah. He strips himself, or he leaves behind. There's a word. What do you say when you say leave something behind? You abandon. Yeah, abandoned. What? Divest yourself. From his first state of being, state of mind, state of Ma'amad Matzav, means his state. And he elevates to a higher level. Now, my friends, and no, that's kikim mebachutz. So they're allowed chiseling. You feel the chiseling? You know what chiseling is? You chisel off like the extra rock to make it polishing the outside. Now he goes, in order for there to be a chiseling from within, etching or chiseling from within. This is now a new contemplation. This requires a bonus in the gili that exists in the world.
One is more of a makif, one is more of a premium.
Well, let's see what he says here, because I'm not. The Eir v'chayis aliki, the energy and life force, divine life force, that manifests within them to give them life, to sustain, energize them. And you energize them all. You enliven them all. So what's the difference between this and what we learned before? So this is clearly more pretty music, so let's see. I'm sorry. And this is how every nivra, every creation, every creature has in it a divine life force that gives it life. Just like nothing can create itself. Same thing, nothing can give itself life. So not just its body can be created by itself, its life force also can be created by itself.
So why is it so much more intimate?
We're just beginning to read. There's a whole chapter ahead.
It's much closer to home, no?
What I guess the Rebbe Shab is going to say, I am sure. Okay. At least let's read till the end of the topic. Then we can compare how it's compared to what he said before. He's bringing the same echocha that he said before. Before he said the yesh. Now he's talking about chayes. Before he said the yesh itself cannot create itself, because no yesh, because when yesh from a yesh can't go for infinitely because they're all finite. It's also murkav. So the same thing, life, the life force. Not just your body could not create itself, your life, the fact that you're alive, the fact that every creature is alive has to come from a life force that gives it life. It's a little different is bonus than what we said before. Yeah. Umepsari echzel akam, from my flesh I behold godliness. U'kamesha'adam margish ba'atzmei. He's bringing down nefesh. In other words, he's bringing it far closer home. Just like a person sees, just like a person senses in himself. He senses a life force that's giving him life. That's what it means to be alive. And not only that, but the primary force is the nefesh, not the body. Not the container, but the energy that's the nefesh. The chol tenuas hachayunis shalei huma nefesh, because all his movement, all his living movements, everything that just even movement itself, the fact that he's alive, the fact that any tenu, any movement, huma nefesh u'betzeisa nefesh ma'guf, and when the soul leaves the body, hariyunisha ke'evendim, the body remains an inanimate stone. Same thing. Also, he also understands, and similarly understands. Ba'elam, just like with himself, he also sees. He sees that's a living world. It's a living world. You see animals, you see a sun rising, you see a movement. The world is not a dead place. It's alive. It's a living world. It's a dynamic world. That means it has a life that gives it life. It's not from itself. And what's the life? That chayis is, that's a likus, godliness. Like it says, Hashem Elokim is God of truth. It's true. He is the God of truth is the God of life. What does this mean? The inyan emes hu mashu b'chinas kiyum nitzchi. When you say emes, the God, the true kiyum, the true sustaining existence is God, because He's forever. And the true kiyum nitzchi is no level in existence, only atzmus itself, because He's the only existence that is from within Himself. His existence comes from within Himself because He's true reality. Everything else is not real. Everything is only there because something put it there. Take away that thing that put it there, it doesn't have any value of its own. Think of the world. Is there anything in existence that must exist? Once it exists, we justify its existence. Nothing must exist. So Atzmus is the only thing that's a true kiyum. This is the only emes. You could say emes, something that has to be emes means emes throughout. Not emes only for a moment. That he must be. Not that he is. Same thing emes, you could also say on the oir. The oir, be'emes on its own also doesn't have anything. But because it's dovuk, because it has nothing but godliness, it's similar to the etzem, to the core. And therefore it's also in a state of kiyum nitzchi. But not because it exists, but because it has no because it has no personality of its own. If it thought it was a Metzias, it would not have Kiyum Nitzchi. It assumes the Kiyum Nitzchi because it's completely bottled and dedicated to the Atzmus. Ukanei de binyan Hukayim, Shmei Kayim, as it's known in the Inyan of Hukayim. Shmei Kayim, what does that mean? He exists, Kayim. He is, what's the Kayim? He's sustained, he's perpetual. Ushmei Kayim, and his name is perpetual. The Hukay al Atzmus, Shmei Kayim, Abchinas Eir. So you say emes and kiyum also on air. Who means atzmus is kayim, like we just said. Mishussim atzmus is the only real reality, and shmai is air is also kayim because of its dovuk, because it's an extension of the divine, completely bottled to it. Like it says elsewhere. All this, by the way, is not just coming. The Rebbe Rashab coming to explain all this. What he's doing here is really giving us his bonus. He's giving us words, ideas to contemplate on. So now he's talking here all about the Chayes Alakus. So no.
Where are we?
Now Chikika B'Pnim. He's going now into what will bring a refinement from within.
But what part of davening?
He didn't say. He's not saying it. There's a Now he's going further. So we established, what did we establish? That life force does not come on its own, it comes from divine. And that's the meaning about Hu Elokim, Hashem Elokim Emes, Hu Elokim Chayim. That the true life force comes from Elokim Emes, because he's the only source of real life, because he's the only thing that must be. Kiyum Nitzchi. And also Eir has that. But now he's speaking in Dveikus itself, he just said Eir has Dveikus, is cleaved, connected to it. He says there's also two levels.
What do you mean must be? There's things in this world that if they don't exist, then there's no world.
So there's no world, who cares? So let's say the world disappeared.
No, aren't we talking relative to the world that there must be?
No, not relative, nothing. Must be means a reality that it's Shusimat Musa. You don't understand that?
I thought it was the world is talking.
No.
Of course.
No, he's talking far bigger here. He's talking in the big picture. You can ask a different question, which is a far more subtle question. How do we know that there must be an existence that is total reality? That must be. In other words, where do we base that on? What logic brings us to that? Let's say establish existence for sure doesn't have to be. So yes, we see any detail of existence doesn't have to be. So all of existence doesn't have to be. If the world didn't exist, so it didn't exist, we wouldn't be here to talk about it. Who says there has to be a thing called a kiyum emes, a kiyum imiti?
Nicht emes, emes. If there's no emes, there's no nicht emes. There's no left, there's no right.
So you're saying if only the world compels that there's a God, and if there's no world, we wouldn't know there's a God.
We are the world.
We wouldn't be around. No one would be around to talk about it.
If a tree falls in the forest, who hears it?
Right. And also another thing, you have to say that ultimately, and my point is, I think that ultimately is a place there's no logic. You have to believe.
Yeah.
Because you have to believe that we say, how do we know a world exists? Bereshis bara Elokim Sheshman v'saaretz. Right, senses means nothing, could be an illusion. Since you believe that God created the world, so and the world itself then dictates that it cannot be self-made, so it dictates that there's a reality like Atzmus. You understand what's going on here? It's a circular.
There's always a jump. It's never a perfect logical thing. I mean, I was thinking about this yesterday when we were going over this too.
Because everything we're learning here, even the extrapolation to say Atzmus is completely different than us and it's a completely different reality, it's still us talking about it. If we weren't around, well, let's put it this way. The truth is, when you say Atzmus exists and doesn't exist is equal to him, so in a Chanami you could say it doesn't exist. Who says existence is valuable? So what do we have left? Something that we completely can't talk about, because it's non-existent as much as it's existent. And again, if it sounds like Atzmus and quacks like Atzmus, right?
It may or may not be Atzmus.
No, but the truth is, you have to come to some point. There's some assumption, some axiom, where the whole thing begins.
Like there's a God.
Now, the axiom, strangely, seems to be our point of reference, which is that we are talking about it. What other axiom do we have?
Because that's the only thing we know.
Because if Atzmus exists without us, what does that have to do with that? We don't talk about that Atzmus. So basically, our existence is dictating that there's such a real existence. So God is ultimately a creation of existence.
We created God.
No, our realization of God.
Because it does come down. Our state of existence dictates that there must be an Atzmus, a Mitzusim Atzmus. That's the bottom line. But that's based on because we believe in that Atzmus that said this world exists. If someone can...
That's all I know.
So what does it matter?
So it's your imagination.
So you have to believe that God said the world exists, and then the world tells you that there's an Atzmus that's completely different than we are.
Figment of God's imagination.
Right, exactly.
So, but let us be.
So we need Moses, we need Mount Sinai, we need some.
And you also have to believe that God created the world with logic, because if logic doesn't matter, then all our machinations are meaningless. Who says our logic makes maybe?
Well, someone has a dream.
That's an easier jump.
There's no logic to it. When you dream, there's no logic to it. Couldn't be the whole thing is just a dream.
It's dangerous territory we're entering here.
Close the door.
No, I don't believe in that. Ein lanu esek ben ustaris, as it states.
Yeah, that's why I say close the door.
Mala fonim, mala acher.
Man di kafshirach, man malamalach.
She missed yesterday. Do the whole thing. Shliya, Abraham, Bino.
This is a good question. Okay, I gotta contemplate on that.
I opened up my mouth yesterday.
Okay, Shmoykaim. So this is a dveikus. So real chai is the. So now he says in dveikus itself. What time do we have?
10:48.
In dveikus itself, he says yesh chilik beifan dveikus mudovik be'etzem. So he's talking about Shmoykaim is dveikus because it's completely bound and connected to and bottle. Completely subjugated to Elokus, or more than that, doesn't even have existence of its own. There's two dovuk be'etzem. This means he's fundamentally attached. Or dveikus nischachus that is constantly hushay mischadish tamid mimkeire. That is continuously being renewed. Shekav dveikus be'etzem, something is just completely, just like the etzem is there, the dveikus of the oyer is there all the time. Or you can say the air is constantly being renewed from its source. The gamzeh b'chinas dveikus. Even the second level is also, the second method is also connected. Valkeinu b'chinas chayes lahachis. That's why this life force that's coming from the divine, the not just shmei, the air, is also a chay. It also gives life because it's constantly connected to its source. So you have atzmos, who's the kiyum atzmi, shisim atzmosei. This reality that is absolutely real. There's Oyer, is just a reflection of that and completely connected to it. Either continuously connected or continuously renewed. And therefore it carries the Kiyum Atzmi of that life force into us. This is what he's talking about, how Chayis enters into our being.
This is what Giluim, he says.
V'zeu sha'chayis hu alakus ha'machayeh. And that's what it means that the chayis is alakus hamachai. When we say godliness gives us life, we're not talking about atzmus. We're talking about atzmus manifesting in chayis, like we said before. Is the ayin alaki, not atzmus. Atzmus is removed from the whole thing, but Eir is carrying the power of atzmus, the power of a kiyum atzmi, the power of a true reality is permeating and entering us and giving us life. That's what he's saying now.
By way of or.
By way of Ar. That is Ar, by the way. Hold on, that is Ar. Ar doesn't have anything but that. That's what Ar is. Ar is the carrier of divine energy, basically. That's what it is. And if God forbid this life force that's coming from Kimatsu would stop, would be removed, ayin ve'efes. Now it doesn't say dead. Ayin ve'efes means nothingness. Dead is nothingness. Why? Because Gashmis has no value of its own. It has no real life of its own. It's all of it is the life force that's being given into it, coming from only from a real life force, which is Emelikim Emes, which is Elikim Chayim. So if you take that away, nothing remains because it has no value of its own. Our existence is not a self-perpetuating or self-justifying. It's justified existence. The Einzek K'may Chayes HaNefesh Beguf. Because we're not talking, this is not like the Chayes HaNefesh Beguf that we spoke about before. The life force in the body. She'ein hi savas to guf aguf me'anefesh. The body is not created from the soul. It's only giving it life. But the world, its creation is from the divine energy. Not just that it gives it life, it also brings it into being. Its body is like that. And that's why when it's removed, it becomes ayin ve'efes.
So it doesn't have the additional
the nothingness.
As a person?
No, he's in place of like
No.
No, I'm talking about the Elam.
Yeah, the Elam.
The Elam has also both things.
So what is he saying about Elam? It's different than Nefesh and Guf.
He said it's different.
Now, if he started out with nefesh and guf, and that's how we also apply it to the world, that the chayis.
Yeah.
Now he's moved on to the chayis is not just the chayis that gives life, that's a living world. He's also talking, he went back now to the yesh, to the yesh of the Welt. We'll see why. He's talking definitely on two tracks here. I don't want to.
Elam definitely has both.
So does the neshamas, and nefesh and guf also has both.
The Shaman Guf is clear.
No, there's the life of the neshama in the guf. There's the body itself, also that's the question I really have here. Why is he saying that? Even the guf also take away the chayis of the key from the guf. It also disappears. We're not talking about life force. We're talking about sustenance.
The sustenance.
I don't know why he did this. I'm not sure. We'll soon see. Because he clearly was making a distinction between life force and existence. That's where he began. But he's going back for some reason. We'll see. We got to read it till then. I don't want to jump. In truth, these are two levels in Elikus, in godliness. Oh, here we go. He's going to say, yes, he's spelling it out. That there's two levels in Elikus. One is the Ayin Eliki, that Mahave, that gives sustenance, sustains existence, which is the mere body, even the body itself. Then there's another, he's spelling it out clearly. Then there's a divine energy that gives it life. Enlivens.
But 1 line ago he said
He's talking about two different things. That's what depends what you're talking about. There he's talking about that. So even though there's two things, in other words, there's an Eliki that's giving life to something, nevertheless the Ki Mitzuyosam is also, they're both dependent. One is dependent on life and one is dependent on sustenance. Also, Ki Mitzuyosam means its actual, the sustenance of its actual existence. Talking about the body itself, not the soul within it. Toli Ba'er Eliki HaMachaya is also dependent on the life force that gives it life, the energy that gives it life. Okay, he's adding a new thing now. Because the power to bring it into, to sustain it, is through the air that gives it life, and in a state of gili. What does that mean? I'll explain, like it says elsewhere. It's a little, it goes back and forth, but it's very clear what he's going to. It's just a little back and forth. He's definitely talking here about life force dynamic. Now he's not talking about the mere sustenance. That's how he started. That this abundance is already connected to life that's in us. Okay, now he said that life also cannot, just like the yesh can't create itself, it can also not give itself life. So life also comes from God. So we have two tracks here, right? Before we spoke about Savas HaYesh, right, the being of the yesh, and now we're talking about the life. So we not only is our body created by God, but also the mere fact that we're alive and walking and talking and moving, that's also a divine force, which comes also from Kiyam Atzmi, who gives life, only the original source of life, Atzmus. But there's two tracks now. There's Atzmus, how he brings things into he sustains actual matter, and there's how he gives life to matter. Clear? The nefesh in the guf is like the life inside. The guf itself, or the world itself, is the sustenance itself. And if you take away the life force, the divine life force, it disappears. Now he says, so really there are two things. He's adding now that not only they both come from God, but also the sustenance of the actual object also comes from the life force that is revealed. In other words, even though it's true a body is not created by a soul, but how does a body develop? Through the soul. Right? If the soul was not there, the egg that was fertilized would not develop into a fetus. You need a life force in there. So the life force is helping develop it, even though it didn't create the seed, it didn't create the physicality of the body. The proof is that when we die, God forbid, after Me'er V'Eshem Shana, when someone dies, they separate, the body is still there. But the body decomposes. Why? Why doesn't the body just remain? Because without the life force, the life force is the channel through which even the sustenance is also emerges. That's what he's saying here. So but he's going to say in a moment, this detail is a footnote. It's not really relevant to this contemplation. He's just qualifying it to make to basically when he was writing this, he was starting to develop it, make sure he's basically covering all his bases here.
Even the existence of the decaying body.
Exactly. Yes.
What does he mean? He says, "Oh, yeah, they are machai liyos bechinas gilui." What's this bechinas gilui?
Yeah, that's such an obvious view.
In other words, how could the power that sustains, let's say, the body, it's a power that would be invisible. It's the neshama, in other words, the chayis alaki, that reveals the power of sustenance in something. In other words, if you only had the koyach hamahava coming, not the koyach hamachaya, it would never be revealed in the entities that exist. We would not have no consciousness of it. It would be like a stone, in a way. But a stone also, you have to say, has a machaya and a mahava. The bottom line, there would be no gili involved, because it would just be God's power to create. So the element that there's a gili of existence, even the thing it says, even if it's not moving, we're not talking about life that's moving. The mere fact that there's a body sitting right here, that there's a table right here, has to say that there's something revealed. So that's coming from the chayis inside this. Now, in a human being, the chayis is very exposed, so we move around and we talk. In a stone, it's not. But everything went through the koyach esavus went through the koyach hamachaya. Think of it. I'll tell you. I'm trying to find a good example. It's like the sun will bring us different rays. Some of them are invisible, ultraviolet, and so on. But they're being carried by something that is visible. So it's like the visible energy is what brings along also the invisible that creates the sustenance. That's the point he's making here.
It's giluim, but it's still yesh me'ayin.
I don't know what that means.
In this, there's no difference between a person and the world.
Yeah. The only difference is that the world you can see is more inanimate, and the person you see clearly a life force. He could have said the same thing about the guf. Why he didn't, I'm not sure. But he basically was saying, because he was talking about the life, and he said he just wanted to explain that there's a distinction between sustenance and dynamic life. That's really what he's saying here. But this that we just said now is not relevant, not negeya, to this contemplation. In other words, this distinction that is coming from the energy or it's coming from the sustenance is not relevant here. The primary contemplation here is that every niv, every creature has by eir v'chayis aliki, has energy and life force, a divine that gives that energizes it. And that the primary force is that divine. That's the bottom line. In other words, this distinction is important, but it's not what his primary focus on this his bonus that he's going to now. Yeah. Now, through this contemplation and hamokas hadas, and how would you translate that? And applying yourself, hamokas. I know amokah means, but no, there's a Hebrew word. Second, when a person immerses himself deeply, profoundly, profound immersion is what I wanted. In the das, in the idea, that he feels this now in his spirit, in his soul. He gets awakened and excited, aroused, ba'ava, with love, Hashem, that he loves Hashem, God, the chafetz l'dofka, and desires to be attached to Him, to connect to Him. That means that his dveikus nafshi, his spirit, his soul should be cling only in this divine energy. And he wants that this divine energy, Yeir Begili, should radiate, illuminate, reveal benafshei be'elam, in his nefesh and in the world. Just like a person who feels that the primary thing is his soul. He wants his soul revealed inside of him. It's an interesting way of putting it. You see? You want life force inside of you. Same thing. I'm sorry. Especially when he's weak. And mu'una means like not oppressed. Tired. It's tired. He's weak, and mu'una means like being oppressed. Exhausted. Mu'una is also tinus from the word mu'una. The Inuyim, mu'una. Weak and afflicted. How do you tov ma'ed? He's very hungry. L'gili er v'chayis hanefesh, to the revelation of the light and energy of the soul. Interesting example, huh? How we want life. If we really contemplate that God is our life, then we should want it just as much as our body wants the soul's energy, especially when we're weak. That's a good way to look at it. Same thing when he understands and feels, not just understands, but feels that the divine energy is what gives him life. And that's the primary, is that divine life. He wants to have this gili. He wants to have it. Same here is also a befrat. Just like in the physical, when he's weak or afflicted, same here, befrat b'riboy ha'lamis, when there's many concealments. And the divine energy is not revealed. He's very, very hungry for this revelation.
In other words, just like when can we say like when a person is tired, he wants to be...
Ta'iv.
Not necessarily hungry, it means wants.
Desires. Tov, like a taiva, not taiva, like a. What I said tov made. I don't know, for some reason that tov always hungry. I don't mean hungry as in food. Tov means a deep, not hunger, thirst, longing. But there's another word. There's another word for hunger. When you're hungry for something, tov made, very needy, very desperate.
Thirst for something.
That's something. Tov. Longs, longing you could say. What were you saying? One second, let me see, maybe we stop here. I think we should stop here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop here, 1 second. So we finished here, second part of chapter 150. It's a long chapter. And this time we went, page 293, through the end close to the bottom of 294. And we continue on, my friends.